Wallet, keys, phone, wallet, AirPods, keys. Phone, wallet, AirPods, keys. Phone, wallet, AirPods. Dang.
Hey, where you going, man? You got it. Here we are, man. End of the line.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yo, D, there ain't been a disaster, has there?
Nothing like that. I'm just thinking you could put in some hours at the Masonette. Make sure we're running things to your exacting standards.
End of the line.
I know you can handle it, bro. But if you want me there, I'll come by.
You tell him I don't care. $1 billion is chump change. What does $1 billion buy anyway today? Doesn't even buy $1 million. No, you tell him that. You tell him Yusuf Amir is speaking. That name does mean something in this town.
Cruise on up to Rotterdam Tower. We got some meat, man.
Please make a U-turn where safe.
I have a special gift, Luis. An auto shotgun with explosive shells.
Thanks, bro. Let's hope I don't have to use it.
I'll just hit Ahmed up with my burner, man. Make sure shit's going down. Yo, Arab, what's up? Tell those bitches at Rotterdam, theirs ain't gonna be the tallest tower for long. Yusuf's in town, baby. And your shit about to be inadequate. Yeah, shit, I'm coming, man. Chill the F out. What are you so head up about? Papa ain't in town, is he? Oh, thank goodness. If it's not Papa, I can't think why you are so agitated. Calm down, will you? I'll see you in a moment. I don't have a good feeling about this. Ahmed is not himself. Very fucking weird. You mind going up to the observation deck and checking it out?
You have arrived.
Thank you, brother. Call me when you know it's all right, all right? Cheerio, buddy.
All right, man, I'll check it out. There they are.
لازم تدي اعصابك يا زلمه، قلت لك بدك تدي اعصابك. Ahmed. Lewis, my man. Where's Yusuf?
What's going on, bro?
What do you mean what's going on? Chill, homeboy. Look at the real estate. Enjoy.
Yusuf! You said he'd be here!
Yo, what's wrong with you, man? Yo, what's going on?
Fucking knows we're in the shit!
What do I know?
I told you to chill, man. Shit.
Tell me what I just walked into. Tell me.
Please, whatever you do, I'm sorry!
Fuck you!
That's fucked up.
Man, this town is full of degenerates.
That's fucked up. That was not cool, Luis.
Midtown unit.
I need suppressive fire!
Possible VIP. Caution.
Talking about collateral damage?
Time for y'all to all leave now! Get low, asshole! Game over, fucko! No more Mr. Touchdown, right? Don't fuck with me! Stay away from me! You're mine! Get down! Drop the fucking weapon! Get the fuck down!
Yo, I don't like heights, man. You gotta tell me where the fuck we at, bro.
We just wanted Yusuf out of the picture.
Yo, what the fuck is going on, man?
Why didn't Yusuf show?
Ahmed, get back here!
Get away from me, you crazy motherfucker!
Talk to me now, Ahmed!
This was meant to be a simple setup!
ACT UP was unafraid to do just that. ACT UP. They protested on Wall Street in 1988, and over 100 people were arrested. They protested inside the stock exchange when AZT, the first drug for HIV treatment, saw its prices rise to an all-time high. Even after Reagan, when George H.W. Bush was president in 1992, they threw the ashes of their loved ones that were lost to the disease on the White House yard. They showed up at Mass at St. Patrick's Cathedral to tell them to mind their business because the church was trying to block condom distribution in schools. HIV and AIDS was heavily associated with LGBTQ plus people. It was seen as sort of a, that's what you get from the religious right. The fact is that the government failed to act on the looming AIDS crisis because the victims of the disease were seen as morally corrupt. The disease was because of sin. Additionally, the CDC lacked funds because of, you guessed it, Reagan's budget cuts, which means that research regarding how the virus was spread and treatment for the virus was also slow to come in. The Reagans were sandwiched in between evangelicals who helped get them elected and citizens that were rightfully demanding action. 1985 was the first time Reagan had said literally anything publicly about the crisis. Reagan folded some to the pressure and agreed to allocate more funding to AIDS research, which Congress approved. The optics were absolutely terrible, and Nancy knew this. At this same time, an old Hollywood friend of theirs, Rock Hudson, had his life claimed by AIDS. She had to get Ronald to say not only something, but the right thing to gain back some of his popularity. She even hired well-known Republican speechwriter Landon Parker to assist in writing the speech that Reagan would deliver. In interviews, he explains how he was not given as much leeway with the speech as was probably needed. Reagan's administration wanted to be sure not to upset conservative America. He also states that one of the wildest things he learned during that time was that Reagan had never had a meeting about the AIDS crisis with the Surgeon General at the time, C. Everett Koop. After almost 6 years after the first reported case, Ronald made his speech on May 31st, 1987. The speech has a few jokes which Parvin was known for peppering in. He praised the doctors and scientists. He pledged $317 million to AIDS research. He addressed the misinformation. But he also mentioned that we should teach our children to have self-respect so that they do not fall victim to promiscuity or drug use. He mentioned that immigrants would be tested. If they tested positive, they would be denied entry. He praised San Francisco for their efforts. It's worth mentioning that according to the San Francisco AIDS Foundation, Mayor Dianne Feinstein's AIDS budget for the city of San Francisco was bigger than President Reagan's AIDS budget for the entire nation. That was true for 2 years in a row in the mid-1980s. In fact, Reagan's proposed federal budget for 1986 actually called for an 11% reduction in aid spending from $95 million in 1985 down to $85.5 million in 1986. Didn't land as well as he hoped for. Instead of being met with its usual roaring applause, there were boos in the crowd. By that time, over 40,000 people had died from AIDS, and many, many, many more had contracted HIV. He closed out the year with an approval rating of 49%. But we can't blame it all on the handling of the AIDS crisis. Earlier that year, nothing short of a scandal was brought to America's attention. A scandal that Reagan was wrapped up tightly in and that would decimate yet another marginalized community. Reagan at first dabbled into foreign policy during his first term as president. It was all about the fight against communism, and a part of that fight was increasing the military budget by billions of dollars. This was the concept that he referred to as peace through strength. By showing other countries our military force would be maintained. It was a key part of his plan. The plan that was going to make America great. And at the time, the world took notice, especially the Soviet Union. The United States was making it difficult at every turn for the Soviet Union to carry out with business as usual. Their leader at the time, Mikhail Gorbachev, figured it was better to have the United States back on their side. And he definitely did not want anything to come to nuclear war. Reagan wasn't exactly sold on meeting with Gorbachev. And in November of 1985, Reagan and Gorbachev would meet in Geneva, Switzerland, and would continue to meet over the years to stop the threat of nuclear war. Reagan feared a nuclear attack, but not enough to get rid of America's nuclear weapons. He also refused to stop the Strategic Defense Initiative, or the SDI, also known as Star Wars. This program would put a defense system in space to stop nuclear weapons before they hit their target. It cost $40 billion and went nowhere. This lack of flexibility was disappointing to Gorbachev. Regardless, relations between the two nations seemed to be improving, so much so that a trade agreement was reached, and the threat of nuclear war was just a threat. Even though today both the US and Russia still have nuclear weapons. And if we were to fast forward a little bit, just after Ronald Reagan left office, on December 3rd of 1989, the Cold War was declared over. So the fight against communism was seen relatively as a success, at least on one front. But the fight was not over. Hezbollah, a political party born out of the Lebanese Civil War, wanted all the smoke with the United States. This party had the support of Iran. In 1985, their first manifesto went public. A portion of it reads, quote, "We declare frankly and clearly that we are a nation that fears only God and that does not accept tyranny, aggression, and humiliation. America and its allies in and the Zionist entity that has usurped the sacred Islamic land of Palestine have engaged and continue to engage in constant aggression against us and are working to constantly humiliate us. Therefore, we are in a state of constant and escalating preparedness to repel the aggression and to defend our religion, existence, and dignity." Unquote. That same year, U.S. hostages were taken by Hezbollah. Ronald Reagan was desperate to bring these people home. Remember when Ronald Reagan initially took office and proudly announced that the hostages in Iran were coming home? After that, the United States pressured those on the world stage not to further add fuel to the conflict that already existed in the region. This was known as Operation Staunch. So now, he was sort of back at square one. Ronald needed some way to bring the hostages home. One man in particular, Robert McFarlane, who was Ronald Reagan's national security advisor, would help him find a way. So there are a few different moving parts here. Communism did not only exist in the Soviet Union, it also existed in other countries throughout the world. One of those countries was Nicaragua. In Nicaragua, the communist Sandinistas had taken control. There was a smaller group known as the Contras who were attempting to fight back. Reagan provided financial support to the Contras to keep their body and soul together. That is, until the Boland Amendment was passed through Congress in the early 1980s. This put a stop to the United States assisting the Contras. At this time, remember, Ronald Reagan was cutting government-funded programs to help American citizens, but conveniently had resources to send to the Contras. This wasn't really the best look, especially in hindsight. Congress also had pretty solid reason to believe the Contras were gaining money by smuggling cocaine. But members of Reagan's team believed that the fight in Nicaragua was worth it because communism. After all, they were going to save the world from communism. This is where Iran becomes important. Iran was at war, and they had leverage when it came to Hezbollah, and could, if they wanted to, help free the American hostages. The U.S. would also now have extra money to send to the Contras, upwards of $18 million. Israel was going to help move the weapons into Iran for the U.S. So, members of Reagan's administration oversaw the sale of weapons to Iran. A little at a time, the hostages were released. But how many arms had been sold by that point? Over the course of the secret exchange, 1,500 missiles were given to Iran for 3 hostages. And on the ground in Nicaragua, not only were the Contras now receiving so much needed cash, those dropping off cash and weapons were bringing something else back to the United States. Now, this is where things get a little wild, so follow me. Coincidentally, cocaine began to enter the United States by the ton in the early to mid-1980s. At the time, there were 63 tons of cocaine coming in and around 4 to 5 million cocaine users. And if anyone is familiar with the laws of supply and demand, when you have a lot of supply and the demand is relatively the same, the price goes down. So dealers with all of this extra cocaine decided to regroup by essentially cooking up the cocaine and transforming it into a solid form. Crack. Crack was more addictive, the high was more immediate, and the consequences were far more deadly than its cocaine counterpart. Those who managed to stay alive and grew up in the 80s will tell you that the crack epidemic was a horrific time in this country, and it was a perfect storm. Remember, in the early 1980s, things were not going well in America. People were hungry, people were unemployed. And even though things were starting to get a lot better, there were so many Americans, especially underserved communities, that were struggling. Far too many people turned to crack for a new high and an escape. But they had no way of knowing how addictive the drug was and just how life-altering it would be. For those who were selling the drug, you literally had teenagers who were making millions of dollars, and they would do anything to protect their newfound wealth. They also had huge targets on their back from rival dealers. This was happening in neighborhoods all over the country. Where you could once double dutch in the street, there were now war zones. And I don't say that hypothetically. People were being killed every day in large numbers. Some just got caught in the crossfires, including innocent children. Black neighborhoods were hit the hardest in places like Atlanta, D.C., L.A., Chicago, and New York. This is because at the time, black people were living in lower income areas due to historical practices like redlining. When the economy was bad, it was even worse for people in these neighborhoods, making them the perfect targets for addiction and turning to crime to survive. And the police were basically useless. Either they were scared themselves, couldn't be bothered, or they were getting in on the action. There are interviews of police talking about being paid off or robbing drug dealers when they would catch them in the act of selling drugs. It was absolute madness. And for a while, the Reagan administration was largely silent. Go figure. It wasn't until 1986 when they made a statement and Nancy Reagan launched their iconic Just Say No campaign. They were saying, remember, drugs, just like promiscuity, is a moral failing due to lack of self-esteem. So if you could just be morally strong enough and say no, then you won't fall victim to drugs. Which also implies that those who did fall victim to the crack cocaine epidemic were somehow morally devoid. It's not shocking that the same president who Coretta Scott King had to fight tooth and nail with just to give her husband his own holiday did little to address or correct the damage done in black communities. And in October 1986, Ronald Reagan signed the Anti-Drug Act. Anyone caught with crack was going to jail for a very long time. And by very long, I'm talking about anywhere from 5 to 40 years. The consequences for cocaine were not nearly as high, but there's another layer to this conflict. Even though black people and white people used crack at similar rates, majority of the people who were being arrested were black and brown. The neighborhoods that were destroyed were black and brown neighborhoods. People who became the face of addiction were black women, and the people who became the face of the violent dealers were black men. The face of the crack baby was a black child, even though the concept of a crack baby has since been debunked. These stereotypes still permeate our society today. Whispers began to spread that the CIA caused the crack epidemic. They investigated themselves and found that they were not guilty, because that's how that works. The black community's concerns were dismissed as conspiracy. Today, there are dozens of TV shows, interviews, and movies telling the true story of cocaine coming from Nicaragua that was just dismissed as a rumor. At the height of the crack epidemic on November 3rd, 1986, a magazine in Lebanon told all of the truth about the Americans' deal. When the story broke that Reagan was involved in secretly funding the Contras, who were helping smuggle cocaine into the U.S., he initially said that he did not know anything about this. The CIA also denied any involvement. Reagan insisted that this story was absolutely false. It wasn't enough for Reagan to just insist. He needed to be investigated. After all, how many times has a president insisted something that turned out to be a lie? Checks and balances were critical at this time. The investigation was going to expose Reagan, and so before things got too far out of hand, he spoke to the American people. So either he didn't know, which is still concerning. No one wants to hear that the president had no idea something this serious was going on. It's incompetent. Or he knew and was lying, which is heartbreaking for a public who thought they could put their trust in him. Or maybe something else. Is it a lie if you believe it or if you don't remember? Oliver North, John Poindexter, Richard Section, Albert Hakim were the major players among many who were looking at multiple different charges, including conspiracy, making a false statement to Congress, withholding information, etc. Caspar Weinbergers, the then Secretary of Defense, was also in hot water, but he maintained during the hearing that, quote, I don't have any memory of any Contra funding or of anything connected with the Saudis that I can remember now, unquote. His journals paint a different picture, though, and despite being charged, he would be pardoned by George H.W. Bush because, of course he was. The Reagan administration ended up taking the fall for him, but it was a soft landing. Most did no jail time, and a few more were pardoned. Reagan was looking at impeachment during the investigation. Nancy was devastated and had to do damage control. She worked to get him in office and wasn't about to see his legacy tarnished. On May 5th, 1987, the investigation was all over TVs in America. Everyone involved was found guilty, except for Ronald Reagan. Nancy Reagan couldn't stand Donald Regan, Ronald Reagan's chief of staff at the time, who was supposed to be keeping an eye out for something like this. But he had been with Ronald since the very beginning, originally as his Treasury Secretary. But now that all of this, was hitting the fan, Nancy wanted him gone. And as with most things when it came to Ronald, Nancy got her way. In February of 1987, Reagan resigned from his position. But more interestingly, in 1988, he wrote a memoir titled For the Record, From Wall Street to Washington. In this memoir, he pulls no punches about his relationship with Nancy Reagan. He also uses the opportunity to air out the fact that Nancy relied heavily on an astrologer for guidance. Now, if a story like this had broken during Reagan's first term, it may have had an impact, but the fact that this came out in 1988 when he was already in his second term, at the end of the term at that, and getting ready to usher in the next president of the United States, while it was a juicy tidbit of gossip, it didn't do much to hurt Reagan's reputation. It would seem that nothing could tarnish his reputation, even with everything we discussed in this episode. People will still say Ronald Reagan was the greatest president who ever held the title. When he left office, his approval rating was at 63%. People overlook so much of the bad because it didn't directly impact them. But for the kids who went hungry at school, for the disabled who were denied proper accommodations, for the people who died due to the lack of response during the AIDS epidemic, and for the people whose lives were rocked by the crack epidemic, Ronald Reagan is not someone they think of fondly. Unfortunately, who died due to the lack of response during the AIDS epidemic, and for the people whose lives were rocked by the crack epidemic, Ronald Reagan is not someone they think of fondly. Unfortunately, too many of them aren't here to tell their stories, and will never know how great America could be if their lives weren't taken too soon. Why even bother concerning ourselves with the legacy of a dead man who was in office over 40 years ago? Aren't we all supposed to be looking toward the future and moving forward? Unfortunately, history doesn't work that way. Regardless of how you voted, some of you may be curious about exactly how we got to this moment in history that we currently sit in. How did Donald Trump win not one, but two presidential elections? And I can assure you, Donald Trump's rise to be the 45th and 47th president of the United States did not start in 2020. It didn't start in 2016. It started in 1979 when he was still buying up properties in New York City. It started with Ronald Reagan. Reagan's legacy, or the Reagan Revolution, as it is so often called, casts a long shadow and is one that we still live under today. There was Richard Nixon, but he was impeached after the Watergate scandal and never got to finish that second term, with his resignation coming about 570 days into that second term. Nixon left a stain of embarrassment on the party, and Gerald Ford, who filled in after him, was forgettable. The Democratic Party was more popular than ever, and the country was inching further and further left with each passing day. This was the era following inspirational presidents like John F. Kennedy and the civil rights legislator Lyndon B. Johnson. And with the passage of things like the Voting Rights Act of 1965, people who previously did not have a say finally did, and they were by majority Democrat. The passage of the Civil Rights Acts of 1964 and 68 improved conditions and prevented against discrimination for not only black people, but all people of color. Women were becoming more and more independent. No-fault divorce had recently become an option in the past decade, so women could finally have a bank account and leave their husbands. And the iconic Supreme Court decision involving Roe v. Wade in 1973 made access to abortion the law of the land, regardless of which state you lived in. The idea was that people have a right to privacy, and this includes an abortion. The LGBTQ+ community were making their way out of the shadows and into being unapologetic and championing the gay liberation movement. The fabric of America was becoming more and more colorful. People who didn't have a say of how America was to be ran and shaped in the past, they had that say now. But Ronald Reagan was a symbol for the time before the changes. He was a Christian Hollywood star from humble beginnings with a lovely family and a dedicated Christian homemaking wife. He wanted all of the same things that any Republican wanted: lower taxes, smaller government, less regulation, communism destroyed, and for the average American to feel motivated enough to pursue the American dream without needing a handout. But his skill was the ability to package these ideas in a way that was unlike anything anyone had seen before. Inspired by the fireside chats of Franklin Delano Roosevelt 4 decades prior, Reagan liked to speak directly to the American people. Reagan had charisma, we can't lie about that, and had Nancy, his wife, in his corner who would stop at nothing to make him president if that's what he wanted. He had several foundations and backers who were becoming more and more frustrated with the appearance and rollout of this new America. The Heritage Foundation, founded February of 1973, was one group that was particularly born out of this frustration. The mission on their website reads, quote, "The Heritage Foundation's mission is to formulate and promote public policies based on the principles of free enterprise, limited government, individual freedom, traditional American values, and a strong national defense." Unquote. What a coincidence. These were all of the same things that Ronald Reagan wanted. His team got to work tapping into the base that would secure him the presidency. Reagan's bread and butter would be the South. Average Americans, Christian evangelicals, and conservative Democrats all wrapped into one. Initially, Jimmy Carter had an advantage in the South because he was from the South, but that didn't matter now. At this time, there were two different versions of the Southern United States. The white people, who were still a little bitter from the Civil War and the progress minority groups were making. They wanted the old South back. And then there were the pockets of the liberal South made up of black people and their allies, often accused of being communists. A large disproportionate number of black people, even to this day, live in the South despite the divide. And these two worlds frequently collide. Ronald Reagan had to make a choice to try and convert black voters to his side who liked Jimmy Carter. Or was he going to have to toe the line of racism to attract conservative Southern white voters? He started out his campaign on interesting footing that made his decision apparent. One of the first places he visited was Philadelphia, Mississippi. It was a choice. Philadelphia, Mississippi had a deeply problematic history. They are perhaps to this day most famous for the 3 civil rights activists who were killed by the KKK in 1964. The murder was covered up by the police department until their bodies were discovered. They were literally only in Mississippi trying to help people vote. This would be the first of many stops in the South that Reagan would make, and at each point he brought up Southern states' favorite phrase, states' rights. The South never really gave up on the idea. If you Google what states' rights are, the definition reads as follows: the rights and powers held by individual U.S. states rather than by the federal government. There are a few problems with this. For starters, this is the United States of America, and how can a country be united when every state is doing things differently? Pete Buttigieg said something very profound in this matter. If I live in one state, why should my right to exist or the right for a woman to have an abortion disappear if I cross state lines? If anything, that was seen to set the stage for another civil war, a war that was fought over states' rights, the right for states in the South to enslave people. And here lies the other problem. What happens when one person's rights clashes with others, or when one state clashes with another? We've seen this throughout history. Another major part of Ronald Reagan's campaign for presidency was fear. This ever-present, ever-looming fear that someone was going to take something from you. We see that in present day with things like the Trump campaign. The government was taking something from you, particularly your money through higher taxes, your ability to exist without wokeness dominating your life. There were people in the world who threatened to take away your safety. For Reagan, it was communism and the dangerous welfare cheaters and criminals. For Trump, it is China and illegal, homicidal criminals and immigrants coming across the border. Both promised to take those fears away. This sort of invisible barrier went up around Ronald Reagan supporters that saw him as the only one who could protect them. His team also leaned on the Heritage Foundation. Sound familiar? They had a long list of recommendations for the president. It was an 1,100-page manual titled The Mandate for Leadership, and it was taken seriously. The Heritage Foundation proudly reports that nearly 2/3 of mandates, 2,000 recommendations, were adopted or attempted by the Reagan administration. Does that sound familiar? This might sound like deja vu because Donald Trump also adopted about 2/3 of the mandate for leadership the Heritage Foundation delivered for these modern times, with the foundation's infamous Project 2025 being the looming threat over a second Trump presidency. And the similarities between the two don't stop there. Both Reagan and Trump can't be described as camera shy. Reagan was an actor who was known for playing lovable characters or flashing his smile in commercials. Trump was a socialite, businessman, and TV sensation before he stepped into the political eye. Both were Democrats that then switched their party to Republican. Both had vice presidential picks that didn't really like them at first. George H.W. Bush criticized Reagan's economic policy, calling Reaganomics voodoo economics. And J.D. Vance, Trump's current VP pick, once considered himself a never-Trumper, even going on record to refer to Trump as a modern-day Hitler. Both Trump and Reagan have survived assassination attempts, although Trump has done that now, not once, but twice. Both have a history of being insensitive to minority groups, Reagan's being more so the I'm not racist, but, and Trump more so just telling it like it is. Both are pro-lifers, both are divorced, both had money. Although Reagan didn't grow up with money, he wasn't some poor Hollywood actor and was even making good money for his age when he was on the radio. Both men even utilized the same exact slogan. Yes, Trump may have trademarked it, but Reagan used Make America Great Again in 1980. The modern-day person would think that Trump was the one to coin it, but no, that was Reagan. So is Trump just Reagan 2.0? Not exactly, but Reagan laid the playbook for the Trump that we see today. There are a few key differences, though. For starters, Reagan's image was much more clean-cut American, wholesome, if you will. Reagan wanted nothing more than to serve in the military, but wasn't able to. Trump wasn't able to either. At least that's what his doctor said. Reagan's peace through strength and Trump's idea of making the world respect America have very different undertones. Reagan didn't want war. It was just necessary to protect democracy. And Trump, since elementary school, was not known to back down from a fight. And Trump seems to not care what other countries think of us. Ronald Reagan was a huge advocate for immigration. He believed that more people coming to America was good for America. He believed that everybody deserved their shot at the American dream. During his second term in 1986, he signed the Immigration Reform and Control Act. At a glance, the act seemed like the classic crackdown on the border. It also put measures in place to impose pretty strict legal consequences for businesses that hired undocumented workers. But if you zoom in a little bit, the act does something else. At the time, there were around 3 million undocumented people in the United States, and this bill gave them amnesty. In the 1970s, immigrants made up about 4.7% of the U.S. population. Today, immigrants make up around 14.3% of the U.S. population, and half of those immigrants come from below the southern border, especially Mexico. Reagan helped to open that door. According to the census data from 1980 to 1990, there was a rise of about 5 million immigrants into the United States. Immigrants went from making up 6.2% of the population to 7.9%, and the number would continue to rise. This was probably the only flaw he had in the eyes of his conservative supporters, but it was forgivable. After his first term, Reagan, of course, pursued a second term. The second presidential race was way easier than the first, but that doesn't mean it was without its challenges. Reagan was getting up there in age. He was 73 when he decided to run again in 1984. For that time, he was the oldest person in U.S. history to hold the title president. The public was concerned about that. His performance at the first debate didn't really help him either. Walter Mondale, his opponent, even stated it was actually a little frightening. 10 years after the debate in 1994, Reagan would be diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, an illness that destroys the brain and gradually robs the person of their memories and ability to function. It is a slow developing disease, and some suspect that this was the beginning of the very earliest sign for Reagan. His son believes that his father did have Alzheimer's during his second term. Regardless, the second debate was a more successful one for the incumbent. He even joked about the age concerns. Reagan was back on top. The result of the second election were even more disappointing for the Democratic Party. Reagan beat Mondale to a pulp. Mondale secured a measly 13 electoral college votes and only about 40% of the popular vote. In the last episode, we learned about the scandals of this second term, but none of it was enough to turn people off from the idea of Reagan. Sound familiar? Donald Trump himself was proud to shake the Gipper's hand during his time as president. The two had a few notable run-ins at various functions over the years, and Trump still speaks very fondly of Reagan now. Although he also said in his book, The Art of the Deal, that Reagan was so smooth, so effective a performer, that only now, 7 years later, are people beginning to question whether there's anything beneath the smile.
That's Trump's book.
Regardless, when he left office, his previous work made it easier for George H.W. Bush, his VP, to take his place. But he wasn't Reagan, and so when he ran for re-election, he was defeated by Bill Clinton. But the future of the Republican Party was already set in motion by Ronald Reagan, and we're seeing those dominoes fall today. Reagan was a huge success. No other president has been able to secure as many votes from the Electoral College since its formation, and the Republican Party wanted to make that happen again. But if we're being honest, Reagan was one of a kind. George Bush was able to continue on his work, but he wasn't as popular as the former president. It's not that he was disliked, he was just different. He didn't give off the same vibe the Republican Party needed to hold on to. Evangelicals distrusted him, particularly when it came to his support of Planned Parenthood. The economy was also in trouble again, and his measure was not doing enough to save it. Unemployment was continuing to rise along with taxes. The 1990s were also when complaints of jobs being sent overseas really started to increase. People were frustrated with the government. Billionaire Ross Perot being one of those people. He ran in 1992 against Bush and Clinton. He formed his own party called the Reform Party and financed his entire campaign. He also caught the interest of a young Donald Trump. George Bush would join Jimmy Carter as one of the few incumbent presidents who did not win re-election, and Perot would secure an impressive almost 19% of the popular vote. For a third-party candidate, that was wild, but what Perot did show was that America didn't mind the idea of a businessman being in charge. But those votes that went to Perot cleared the way for Bill Clinton to assume office with 43% of the popular vote. Now, Bill did have a charm people liked. He may have been a cheater, but he knew how to balance a budget. He was tough on crime and even managed to run a surplus with the country's budget. He was considered more of a conservative Democrat. But he was also responsible for things like establishing family medical leave. In the 90s, the strategy of Democrats appealing to the moderate middle worked out very well for Bill Clinton. Not so much today. His approval rating numbers were even similar to that of Ronald Reagan, even passing them at some point. When he left office, his approval rating was at 66%. Much like how the Republicans were hard-pressed to find another Reagan, the Democrats wouldn't be able to find another Clinton. Republicans also had a new tool at their disposal. In 1996, a brand new channel was popping up on people's TVs. The Fox News channel appeared on the scene 16 years after CNN. It was founded by Rupert Murdoch with the purpose of bringing conservative news to the viewers. After Bill Clinton, the son of Ronald Reagan's vice president and former President George H.W. Bush would become the next president of the United States, George W. Bush. And he wasn't Reagan, but he was likable. He was perfect for an age that was going digital. We all see the clips from his time as president of him being unapologetically himself. But for the Republicans, he was a little too soft. George Bush believed in the philosophy of being a compassionate Republican. He spoke Spanish and thought it was important to speak to Hispanic voters and had a similar view of the border as Reagan. George Bush would go on to have a second term that was remembered mostly because of the recession and housing market crash. Unemployment was around 8%. 10 million Americans suffered housing loss after banks lent out money and didn't even care if people could pay it back. But when they couldn't, the housing market crashed and the government bailed the banks out. Bush sent out a stimulus, but no one even remembers that because things were already so bad. So bad that people were so destitute that they would turn to an unexpected presidential candidate for some change. Obama would come after George W. Bush and offered that change. Senator John McCain, who ran against him, couldn't. People were exhausted after 8 Republican years with Bush. Plus, his VP pick, Sarah Palin, was, to put it kindly, clueless. In some ways, though, Obama was way too much change. It didn't help that he was a biracial man named Barack Hussein Obama, but the policies he implemented would make conservatives heads spin. For example, in 2015, gay marriage being legalized was like a knife to the heart of the evangelical community. In the background of all of this, there was Donald Trump. Donald Trump had been interested in politics since the 90s. And if you want to know a little bit more about that, you can check out our deep dive episode on Donald Trump's life. And the relationship between him and Obama would put him directly in the spotlight. Trump came out and made a statement that he did not believe that Barack Obama was a United States citizen. He demanded to see his birth certificate. Mind you, no other president had been asked to accommodate this request. The undertones were racial, but Trump insisted that based on the information that he had, it was necessary. Not only did Obama provide his birth certificate, but he made it a point to embarrass Donald for making an accusation. But to Trump, Obama may have won the battle, but he would win the war. At this point, Donald Trump's name was back in households again, and not for The Apprentice, not for his business, but for politics. People were starting to look at him as a viable option for president. But remember, Trump always said he would only run if he could win. We hear sometimes America is a business, and you need a businessman to run it. And although some of his businesses failed, Trump was a son of a hard-working first-generation man. And if there's one thing to know about Donald Trump is that he considers himself a winner. He refuses to lose. But more importantly, he's an expert in marketing himself. When Trump had financial troubles, he convinced everybody he was rich. When he was just getting started out and taking over his businesses, he convinced people that he was the best person to partner with. The man has even convinced 3 different women to marry him throughout his life, regardless of saying things like, grab him by the... Yeah. Policy aside, people like Donald Trump. And out of this out of frustration and worry, MAGA was reborn from the ashes of Ronald Reagan's presidency. After Reagan, the years of Democratic presidents and Republican disappointments left the same face that Reagan had activated 50 years ago, feeling left out once again. Their distrust of government had grown thanks to Bill Clinton's impeachment and George Bush's handling of the war in Iraq. They wanted someone they felt they could trust, someone who was honest, someone who gave that charisma that Reagan had given back in the day. They demanded politics take a new shape. Political conversations needed to be raw and unfiltered to be trustworthy, something that would make a 1960s Republican housewife clutch her pearls. The government needed to be small, non-existent. With emotions high, the lines between facts and fiction became unclear. The existence of a pandemic was debatable, and Trump came out on top. Trump's legacy will forever be cemented as the president who helped the Supreme Court secure a large Republican majority and overturn Roe v. Wade. The president that banned Muslims and championed mass deportation. Even as unpopular as he seems, having never had more than 50% approval rating and seen approvals as low as 34%, he has yet again secured the presidency. And Republicans are in control of all 3 branches of government. The red hats don't just mean I am a Republican. They mean I am with Trump and he is with me, for better or for worse. I guess we'll find out what that really means in 2025. For conservatives, I think it's safe to say that MAGA is not exactly the same Republican Party of days past. It's transformed into something else that some say Ronald Reagan wouldn't even recognize. Or maybe he would. We'd have to go to the grave to ask him. If you want to ask yourself how we got to a second Donald Trump presidency, weave through the last 50 years like a puzzle. And like many problems in modern day America, you will come up with 2 words: Ronald Reagan.
Calculating route. In 1 mile, turn left. Please make a U-turn when said. Please proceed to highlighted route.
What the funny. It's fucking hilarious. I told you to do it again. Oh.
Attack in progress on Noose Air Transport. Units respond.
Properties in Savannah, Georgia. One of them was a home where an elderly black woman lived. That woman's name is Leola Williams. Leola Williams is Clarence Thomas's mother. A sitting United States Supreme Court justice sold his mother's house to a GOP mega donor and told nobody for 9 years. That's not where this story ends. That's not even where it begins. By the end of this episode, you will not be asking, is Clarence Thomas corrupt? Because if you clicked on this, you probably already know the answer to that. But you will be asking, how did we let this happen for over 30 years? I'm going to show you 5 things. 1. How a boy born into poverty in Jim Crow, Georgia was groomed, transformed, and weaponized by the conservative political machine. 2. The black woman who tried to warn us before he took his seat and what was done to silence her. 3. How he used the most powerful bench in the world to dismantle every legal protection his own community fought and died for. 4. The secret network of billionaires who've been purchasing his loyalty for over 2 decades to the tune of $4.2 million. And 5. Why the man who says the Supreme Court is the most dangerous branch of government might be right about himself. I'm Andre, and this is Redacted History. Pinpoint, Georgia, a rural town outside of Savannah, Georgia, founded by freed slaves in 1896. And in 1948, it was still deeply Jim Crow. And into this town in 1948, in a wooden shack, Clarence Thomas was born. Clarence Thomas grew up entrenched in deep, deep poverty. His family's home had no indoor plumbing. His father left when Clarence was young, and his mother, Leola, worked to provide for the family as a domestic servant, making $10 an hour. When Clarence was 7 years old, their home burned down, and Leola would send Clarence and his brother to live with his maternal grandparents, specifically his grandfather, Myers Anderson, who Clarence would come to refer to as Daddy, because Clarence would grow to view Myers as his real father. Myers was the definition of strict, Catholic, and militant. He built a fuel delivery system and was a self-made black man in an era where the law made that nearly impossible. Clarence would go on to credit Myers with helping him become a man and instilling his values. He was a forceful patriarch and disciplinarian, and he molded Clarence into a man. The contradictions begin in the fact that Myers Anderson sacrificed everything so that Clarence Thomas could be a successful black man out of Pinpoint, Georgia. And Clarence would go on to squander that sacrifice. Clarence would attend Catholic schools paid for by Myers' church. And in these schools, the school kids would give Clarence a nickname that would stick with him mentally and emotionally for the rest of his life. They called him ABC, America's Blackest Child. Now, I want you to hold on to this image of Clarence Thomas, because in a few minutes, I'm going to show you what he believed by the time he was 19 years old. And it will shock you, because it is the complete opposite of everything that he stands for today. With zero prior context, you'd probably think that Clarence Thomas was a lifelong conservative if you just Googled him. That how he arrived at the Supreme Court is how he's been since birth. But that's simply not true at all. Before Clarence became conservative, he was a black radical, an activist, a follower of Malcolm X and the Black Panther Party. But what happened? Once I explain this transformation, everything will make sense. Clarence Thomas believed he wanted to go into priesthood, so he entered a seminary college in Missouri in 1967.
I can't do this. I'm like...
An activist, a follower of...
I'm so fucking bad.
Attack in progress on Zeus air transport. Units respond. Dispatch air units on common. Luis, you got it!
Yeah, bro, but the cops are all over me.
Ha
Yusuf, bro. Where you at, man?
Over here, man!
Where?
Up here, motherfucker! Shit! Stand back when I pick this thing up!
Okay, man.
Thanks for everything, bro! You're a fucking diamond!
Don't mention it.
Diamond in the rough.
Typical man. Whatever, creep.
Hey, baby, what's the word?
Monto, can you stop?
Relax, pal. I'm just trying to get to work.
You think that'll get me a beg? Beg your pardon, Happy.
D, bro, what's happening?
I've organized that face-to-face with our good friend.
Ух, я сейчас тебе дам прикурить. Вот гад.
I'm genuinely bored as shit. I can't bear this.